We're going to just get started. Hello, and welcome everybody here today. My name is Marika Van Dam, and I'm Executive Director of History Cambridge, and I'm excited to have you here for our talk today, The History and Future of the Massachusetts State Flag. I am here at my office on Brattle Street. I have dark hair, light skin, and glasses, and I realize I'm in a bit of a dark room, but that's where I am today. Um, History Cambridge has a lot of exciting events coming up, and I just want to mention a few for folks who are on the call. We have our fundraiser this week, Culinary Crossroads, and more information is on our website. I hope you'll consider signing up. It's going to be a great time over at the Cambridge School for Culinary Arts. And thanks, Beth. She's getting you some links in the chat. We also have coming up on November 10th, the start of our speaker series, Washington in American Memory. That is going to be with our partners over at the Longfellow House, the Cambridge Public Library, and others, and is going to span into next year. Now, I don't want people to think that we have forgotten about East Cambridge. We're spending our year in East Cambridge. It's coming up, and we do have some fun events still to come. And I realize that some people may be watching this later on YouTube channel, but I want you to know that we always have exciting events happening at History Cambridge. So go to our website, historycambridge.org/events, and see what we have coming up. History Cambridge is, as you know, a private nonprofit, and so I'm really excited that we're able to offer this program to you for free today. It will be also on our website and available forevermore. And I want to thank especially the people who chipped in a few bucks to help make this happen. If you support the work that we do and you think that what we do is worthwhile to Cambridge, I hope you'll consider supporting. And information about that is on our website. I'm pretty excited today to have our friends back, Dr. David Shane Lowry and Sage Carbone. Their bios are on the website, so I'm not going to go too much into what they've done. Sage is a member of the Northern Narragansett tribe of Rhode Island. We've seen her before. She was here in East Cambridge. She worked on a great project, which you've seen, the signage over in East Cambridge with Indigenous language on it. And David Shane Lowry, our friend, also participated in that project. Both of them were with us on a project about Indigenous history in 2023. And we're excited to have them back. They will explain to you how they want to handle questions and comments, but I hope that you will fully participate in tonight's discussion. And if we don't get to everything, please be in touch. You know how to reach us. info@historycambridge.org is my email. It comes directly to me. And we would love to hear from you. So without further ado, I'm going to kick it over to David.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Good to see everybody. I really do want to leave. I think Stage agrees, or and she can state if she doesn't or not. I think she does. Agrees that we're going to leave some time in this hour for you all to ask questions. So my emphasis right now is to offer some historical and ethnographic, anthropological perspective on the importance of this flag conversation in Massachusetts, and then turn it over to Sage, who will take you down kind of an interesting trail of examples of why this is an important conversation. Um, so yeah, I'll share my screen and we'll get started. So this is about the history and the future of the Massachusetts flag. And as an anthropologist, so I'm trained in anthropology. I actually got my I'm from the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina, and but I moved up here to Boston, to Massachusetts, to Cambridge, to go to MIT as an undergrad. And essentially, I came here in '99, and I remember I had classmates who were Wampanoag, and some who were from different tribal nations across the continent of the United States and Canada. And I remember having a conversation with my Wampanoag friends back then about how it was almost kind of heavy to talk about Native identity here in Massachusetts. And I never really understood as an 18, 19-year-old why that was. Now that I'm, 20 plus years down the road, it's very clear why that is. Massachusetts, by definition, is a big facade. It is a place where, from the very beginning of colonial encroachment into this Commonwealth, as it's called now, there's been this effort to dename and to rename something that is not does not belong to non-native peoples. So the magic of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is back in the day, they said, you know what? We are quite literally going to take the name of the Massachusetts people and we're going to make it ours. We are quite literally removing them from ownership and hijacking their space and their land and their ecologies, and we're going to put this costume from their filleted realities and put it over ourselves and call ourselves Massachusetts. And that quite literally is where the name comes from. I know it sounds gruesome me saying the filleted, realities, but that's what it is. Colonialism very much is about non-native, non-indigenous peoples wearing costumes, whether those are costumes where they dress up as Indians at Halloween, or whether they take the names and the images and the life of indigenous native peoples and put it upon themselves or put it upon yourselves. Some of you are not native, and put it upon yourselves so that you can kind of attempt to be indigenous to this land when you're not. Now, the question becomes, and this is a deep philosophical question, where did your people come from and why did they leave their indigenous places to come here to Native America? Which is not a question we're going to answer today, but it's a philosophical question that you can perhaps have with your family and community. Anyway, we're going to move forward here. Let me see if this will. There we go. This conversation about the Massachusetts seal and the Massachusetts state flag is right in front of you. Um, it is first and foremost a conversation about how the people in our community, some of you and some of the institutions that you're part of, the people who govern your society, our society, it's about attempts to build life and to commandeer life in the midst of death or genocide. And when I say genocide, I'm quite literally talking about how the United States is, by definition, a hijacking and a disappearance of American Indian, Native American, Indigenous lifeways and names and communities on purpose. Now, how does this show up? It's right in front of your eyes. Not only do you have the Massachusetts state flag, which quite literally is the symbol on the left, is an American Indian, Native American person who has the colonial sword about to come down and whip off their head, which is how a lot of Native people in Massachusetts read that flag and that symbol. Underneath that flag, quite literally, if you walk through Boston, you have places like this, like the Old South Church in Boston, who attempt to practice this sense of life. And this is a sign, and every semester I read this to my anthropology students and ask them to interpret it and sort of tell me what it's missing. The sign on the front of the Old South Church says, "Be the church, care for the poor, embrace diversity, reject racism, fight climate change, forgive often." They're asking us to do a lot, right? Doesn't it end? Love God, empower the powerless, share earthly and spiritual resources, enjoy this life. Now, my question is to my students when I share this, and again, you can see this as you walk down, is it Boylston, if I'm not mistaken? I believe it's the street right there in front of the library. You can read it for yourself. What is it missing? And now my students, after they hear me a few weeks, they realize that I talk a lot about stolen American Indian indigenous land and the disappearance of Native people. I have a few bright students who raise their hand quickly and say, "Why doesn't it mention you all, Native people?" I'm like, exactly. Why doesn't it? Now, you could argue that reject racism is perhaps a nod to Native peoples and sort of the need to rematter us as Native peoples. You might say that empowering the powerless might be a nod to us, right? But I would hope that an institution like this that attempts to herald sort of a liberal perspective on life, where we need to actively empower and humanize people, would actually say this church is on stolen Indian land that we should return, that we must return. Why doesn't the sign for this church say that? Now, that's not a rhetorical question, but we're not going to answer it right now. We're going to continue on. What I want you to see, though, is that even in the spaces and institutions of Massachusetts, of Boston, of Cambridge, that you think are liberal and open-minded and they care for people and they want diversity and inclusion, underneath all of that is there's a that is a veneer, and underneath all of that is this non-conversation about how everything in America, left and right, Democrat, Republican, liberal and conservative, whatever, everything exists on stolen Indian land, stolen indigenous land, and there must be a response to that in your everyday lives to sort of what do we do? What do we do with the fact that we're currently, our state as the United States, or our situation as the United States, is by definition the evaporation of native and indigenous ways and communities and nations. Now, I will say this, it's right in front of you, this kind of disappearance of native peoples, but I feel like institutions and states and colonial governments do everything but return or suggest that we should ought to return Indian land and sort of more generally rematter and humanize native peoples. I teach in Maine at the University of Southern Maine. I oftentimes tell my students to look at the cars that they drove up in to the university. A lot of my students drive to class. All of their license plates say vacation land. And more generally, they say Maine. The roads that they drive down, they say you're entering Maine, you're entering vacation land. And I asked them, and it's a very serious question. Why is it that the state of Maine, instead of saying that it's Wabanaki land, which it is, the whole state of Maine by definition was Wabanaki land until it was officially stolen vis-a-vis or via the Supreme Court in 1980 with the Maine Indian Claims Settlement Act. That was the official hijacking of two-thirds of what we now call the state of Maine from the Wabanaki people. Why doesn't the state signs and the license plates say that this is Wabanaki land? Again, it's on purpose because for Maine and vacation land, for this imagination of where we exist to exist, excuse me, I'm dropping stuff. We have to, or the government, the colonial government has to not mention the fact that Native peoples even exist, much less that this is there in our land. Now, this is our, when I use the term our, here's a license plate from the state of North Carolina. My tribal nation, the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina, fought for about 10 years. And this license plate is the standard license plate of the state of North Carolina, and it says first in flight, and that's the standard sort of mantra on the plate. But you can get a special license plate from North Carolina that actually says American Indian, and they're specially numbered. And a lot of Lumbee people in particular have these plates, and they say that and this is them speaking, they're like, I bought this license plate because I want people to know that we actively worked or not worked with, but actually forced the North Carolina state government to give us some recognition in the form of a license plate because our tribal community, we're very car-centric people. We very much center our lives around what kinds of cars we own and so on and so forth. A lot of our peoples are race car drivers and those sorts of things. So we love the fact that our license plates can have that signifier that we are American Indian on there. I don't give you an example here, but this is the typical plate that most people that are not native have. Now, what was the beginning, or what is the beginning of these colonial, what I call colonial facades, right? These colonial disappearances of native peoples. It starts with the Massachusetts Bay Company in the mid 1600s, which basically was an arm of of the British government, and they were officially doing business between Great Britain and the United States pre United States of America. Now, what is interesting about the seal, and what I think Sage, the last time we talked about this, Sage actually pointed this out, but this comes up often, is that the picture, the seal of the Massachusetts Bay Company actually has the native person half naked, right, not clothed at all, which is not how native peoples dressed at that time. They were much more regally dressed than Europeans were. This image has the native person saying, "Come over here and help." This simple statement put kind of in a bubble out of the native person's mouth does two things. It assumes or makes you assume that Native America was a savage, that we were not human, that we were somehow less adult than Europeans were. And it situates us in that sort of childlike state permanently. And as such, there's two things that happen. America is not seen as a highly engineered and highly constructed space before Europeans got here post 1492. There's a reason why Europeans came, or some Europeans came to the United States post 1492. It's because they needed, actually, starting with 1492, it's because they needed our help. They needed our spices, they needed our engineered realities, our knowledge of science, which they took and used in different areas like agriculture. We helped Europeans survive. We've been doing that for decades and centuries. Up until today, we're still doing work, especially in the realm of agriculture and communication, education, to help non-native peoples survive. The second point I wanted to bring up is that this state of childlike reality that this seal sort of enforces is this idea that Europeans, again, didn't need didn't need help, that they were actually coming over to America to be the helpers. This is the antithesis of reality. Europe needed us, Native America. And in the process of them needing us, they came over to what they called the New World, even though it wasn't new. We had been here 100,000 years. Um, they utilized their relationship with us and the fact that we actually took care of Europeans to then gain some power, gain a lot of political power, and then begin to turn back over or turn us back over into a system under which we existed underneath the colonial sword that, by definition, was about to and has come down to chop off our metaphorical and our literal heads. And why do I bring up this idea of there being a metaphorical and a literal killing? Well, the Massachusetts flag flies in front of today the Boston State House in Boston, Massachusetts. It was developed, this particular form of the Massachusetts Commonwealth flag was developed in the late 1800s, I believe after the Civil War, if I'm not mistaken, and it was sort of like widely developed, or I'm sorry, adopted into the early 1900s. Now, this is where symbology becomes reality. The flag, yes, has a sword, a colonial arm swinging a sword, perhaps swinging down to chop off the native's head. It has it in this kind of message that isn't quite complete. You're supposed to, as Native people often do, you're supposed to assume that there's some kind of antagonistic relationship between the colonial sword above and the native person below. Well, if you look over to the picture on the right, this is the state house where the state flags currently exist. And just below the state house, this green area down here, to sort of to the right of the photo, is Boston Common. What happened in Boston Common was not neutral. Like Boston Common didn't just wasn't just like carved out as a park that from the 16 and 1700s people were just supposed to come to Boston Common and sort of play and sort of have fun with their kids. No, it was a killing field. Down below the State House, 1600s into 1700s, there were gallows, places of hanging that were situated throughout this park. And so people in the State House could look down because this is like the State House is on a hill looking down a hill towards the bottom of the Boston Common. People in the State House could watch systematically the Commonwealth of Massachusetts bringing in, trying, and then down in these gallow or killing fields, executing Native peoples from various tribal nations, from the Wabanaki in what is now called Maine, all the way down to the Narragansett and various tribal nations going down towards New York. I think Mashantucket, Pequot were affected by the legislative power of Boston at that time also. So the range of power of Boston and of these killing fields was quite large. Now, I bring all of that up because, as I say to my students oftentimes, genocide over here breeds or births genocide over in some other part of the world or the nation. If you pull a string on one side of the cloth, there's always a ripple where you can see it in the entire cloth. So, how is genocide in the United States, in Boston, in Cambridge, which has been intimately associated with Boston and its killing, how is it affecting the rest of the world? Well, you have the pictures of the Boston Tea Party, which if you take this very grainy image, it shows you sort of in a very kind of pungent way how colonizers, people that were part of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, from the very beginning of the colony were attempting to dress up in native costume as native people to symbolize sort of this kind of savagery that they were practicing. This was one, turning native peoples into constant savages, which we weren't, but non-natives always wanted to make us out to be, violent. At the same time, it allowed, it sealed, if you will, the name of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts into the public, into the corporate body, if you will, of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, into the body politic, if you will. And so people historically, both in Massachusetts and across the United States, use this image of white men dressed in Indian costume to solidify this idea that Boston is the birthplace of democracy and freedoms and liberty. Underneath all of that is hidden, right? It's all a facade. Is hidden the genocidal power and presence of Boston and the associated city, Cambridge, and its role in the devastation of Native communities, Native nations throughout what we now call New England. All right, so that ripple effect, as I was talking about earlier, makes its way across different zones of humanity. The Department of Interior uses the word squaw. And I think as of a week ago, even though Trump is president, the Department of Interior has been removing the word squaw, SQUAW, which in this context has been used as a derogatory term, even though in New England there's a different conversation about the history of that word, has removed the word squaw from federal lands. Over in Europe, Germany, I believe, and a couple other countries, maybe Denmark, native peoples, native mascots, if you will, are used by teams, and white people in Europe continue, like with the Boston Tea Party, to use native peoples as a mascot. And a mascot, and not to sort of be not in a way that is endearing, is Europeans, white folks in Europe using native images, this costume that is supposed to indicate the savagery or the violence of native peoples as they assert, as a costume while playing soccer, other highly active, perhaps violent sports. This shows up in America with sports. You have a duality of message. The Chiefs, Kansas City team that were at games, they beat toy drums at the games. They mock Native people. They play music that is supposed to be a mocking of Native song. Um, Fans wear headdresses, or well, apparently not in the last couple years have they worn them, but they wear face paint. um, all of that happens, right, within the context of a larger economy of football where the NFL says, well, behind your end zone, we want you to put the words in racism. And a lot of Native people ask the question, how in the holy green earth, right, are we supposed to accept the idea that the team is mocking Native people, yet at the same time, they have a message right behind the mocking of Native people, a message that very clearly says they don't want to be racist. So, that what we would call that cognitive dissonance, if you will. There's a certain sense of cognitive dissonance within which Americans have and continue to attempted to show some sense of humanity, but in that humanity which they attempt to express, they must, and all of that, suppress and mock and dehumanize Native American Indian indigenous peoples in the United States. This has affected politics. This is the famous screen from the CNN news coverage of the 2020 presidential election. The person on CNN listed all the people coming out of the polls. They have white people, Latino people, black people, something else, Asian. And Native peoples actually took that and said, whoa, pause. Do we have a new name now? We're not the savages. We're not the Redskins anymore. We're the something else. And I believe the Navajo Nation actually put up a billboard down on the tribal nation's reservation where they said, "Hey, we're the something else. We need to, let people know that we have a new name now." And it's like you laugh instead of crying. You make fun of it because you realize that people really just don't get it. They do not realize how very actively they disappear and dematerialize Native life and Native humanity. This has shown up in other ways as I continue very quickly. The Nazi symbol that Hitler used as part of the Nazi regime excuse my language, is a bastardization, is a corruption, if you will, of indigenous American symbology, which this symbol on the top left in this rug has been used in different nations across the world over time for thousands of years. But Hitler understood that as a symbol of native peoples who, in his mind, were properly executed and disappeared by Americans. So what did he do? He took it, reversed it, and used it as a symbol of his national erasure of Jewish peoples and other peoples that he deemed undesirable. So within the context, and I know we're at some, and Sage will explain sort of maybe where we're at with it. In this process of creating and situating it ourselves in a new sort of system of flag and symbol in Massachusetts, there's two steps that we have to take. We have to remove the harm of the colonial symbol that is based on mocking of American Indian peoples, especially the conditions of a sword, colonial sword, about to coming down and about and sort of as a picture of a soon-to-be beheading of Native peoples, which, as I said earlier, is a representation of violence that actually did happen nearby on Boston Common and other parts of Massachusetts. Secondly, we had to have a symbol that showcases whose land this is. Now, I've seen mock-ups of different flags. There's like a dinosaur running around with a Dunkin' cup. It's funny, but at the end of the day, no, we need a flag that actually showcases whose land this is, that it's indigenous land, that it's American Indian land. There's other cities and towns across America that are dealing with this. City of Austin got into a lot of like sort of social media trouble when they went from this kind of weird mix of like genie cup and or whatever container to other lamp to with a cross and whatever. They changed that to this kind of awkward ambiguous sort of a symbol. And not that I'm going to critique this, the point is there's a lot of cities, towns, states that are in the midst of changing and reconstructing their symbology in the United States. Now, one of the last things the last thing I want to leave you with is the fact that we live in or around the Gulf of Maine. Maine is not Maine. Maine is Wabanaki. As you see here, Wabanaki, or the kind of Wabanaki Confederacy, covers this whole section of both Canada and the United States. I have a theory, or not a theory, a suggestion. We need to actually transform the Gulf of Maine into the Gulf of Wabanaki. And I think that would be very pivotal, very important, very central, if you will, super central, to a development of a redevelopment of what we see, what we kind of experience here in Cambridge, in Boston, in Massachusetts, and beyond. Anyway, with that said, I'm gonna turn it over to Sage to continue this conversation.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it. Let me share my screen as well. Let me make sure as everybody, oh, share. All right. So yeah, then again, thanks, David. Let me if these are the right size. Um, so how can we start applying these to, these concepts that David has brought up to where we live? Um, what are some of the symbols that we may have grown up with that were, really important to us, or maybe not? Maybe we didn't even notice them, but are deeply entrenched in the history of where we live and where you grew up. David mentioned mascots as one of the hot button issues happening at this time, which is also part of the Massachusetts legislative agenda. So I would suggest checking out the list of different issues that uh, native groups are um, encouraging people to learn more about, and one of them being the symbolism that comes behind mascots. I grew up as a Red Raider with full-on face paint. Well, not me doing it, but face paint, the war whoops, everything else. Um, and my hometown symbol, actually, in contrast to that, is a picture of the birthplace of John Brown, a famous abolitionist. It was just the anniversary of Harper's Ferry the other day. So just thinking about some of those juxtapositions that might be happening in your hometown. So after my quick presentation, I'd really encourage you all to, look up some of the history of where you're from. What do those signs, symbols, and histories mean? Who created these symbols? Why do they matter? Do they matter? Um, and really, if a change is needed, be that change to see what can happen. So we are starting out with a picture of the city seal of Leominster, um, which, as you can see, has the native person again shirtless, in contrast to our uh, pilgrim colonizer in full dress with a gun and facing a peace pipe on the other side. All, of course, under the rampant lion symbol, which is a common theme and icon in English signage, but you would think that in New England, we would reject some of those things. So I'm going to focus on a couple of different depictions of how Native Americans are portrayed across Massachusetts' current symbols. So it has a little description. The town of Bourne, oh, coming in there. So you can see you have two boats looking kind of like they could be the Mayflower or some type of pilgrim coming in. You have a deer, you have a teepee in the back, bare feet. The only part I really like is the rope around the outside. So just thinking of future designs. So we have one man wearing a hatchet, the other with a bow, and in the rear is a teepee. So teepee is probably something that you've seen in classic depictions of Native Americans. And I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but we really weren't using teepees in New England. Not often, certainly not for long-term living in is super hot, super cold, even with the climate change. Just like in previous depictions of shirtless or natives just in um, a loincloth, we don't do that up in New England. It's cold and it's hot and it does not work. So actually last year, the town of Bourne did vote to change the seal, and there's a commission currently going with the Herring Pond Wampanoag members to undergo this process. Grafton, I won't, it is really the reservation space for most Nipmucs at the Hassanamisco. Uh, so, and this is probably the most historically accurate depiction of what a Native American Indian had looked like when uh, when the town was founded. So you can see, furs, arrows, backpacks. It's a little bit more thought out. Uh, and of course, it's in not sharing that space with a white person. This symbol for Groton does not have a Native American on it, but it is a point of debate happening right now because it's the only one in Massachusetts that includes a picture of the Holy Bible on it. And in case you didn't know what that book was, it says it right in the middle, Holy Bible in capital letters. So faith and labor. It sounds so boring. No one, this would not make me want to move to Groton. No offense. So why was this symbol so it turns out it was just created because there was a mandate in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So, and it was when we see some of these dates, so that mandate was created in the late 1800s, but Groton was already around for quite a long time. Um, it is still under debate of whether or not to replace it, and they're thinking that they might not want to invest that $76,000 or so to do. But if you live or know someone in Groton and have alternate ideas, they are up for debate. Andover, I recently found this one, thought it was pretty interesting. Uh, the headdress, which likely would not be worn as part of everyday attire, especially while shirtless and in suede pants. Uh, it's interesting. Take what you will from it. Does it represent Andover uh, when at all? Is this what you think of when you think of Andover? Maybe. But Harwich, same thing. We have TP with what looks like a woman in a kimono. I'm not quite sure. Uh, over one of their town properties there. So there is a canoe in the back, but uh, and you might also notice that there's no rhyme or reason to incorporated, adopted, settled. Uh, there's just no continuity, which really goes, as David had alluded to in our previous conversations, it really doesn't matter. If there's no commonalities, if there's no concrete reasons, like, does it matter? Is it forever? East Bridgewater, uh, going back to Come Help and Save Us, actually shows, what would be trading between pilgrims and uh, probably the Wampanoag here. Uh, a little bit more common that a headdress might be worn in this time. Uh, Interesting that again, this doesn't have anything hearkening. This scene was not happening in 1823. So to me, it's a little bit confusing, and I would imagine uh, speaks to people's belief that natives still look like this, or they still look like this in 1823, or that's what we're supposed to look like. Uh, Mendon, I apologize, it's a very blurry, smaller image. Uh, I have family that were from Mendon, Massachusetts, from that were that were Nipmuc and Narragansett, and I think it just looks kind of like a Hollywood Disney scene to me. It doesn't read as uh, depicting Mendon or the native people of those area in a positive way. It's just confusing. And I also just want to do a funny one that I think the Fall River Police symbol, their motto is "We'll try," and it's not because of anything about the police themselves. It's actually a motto from Fall River, where when the city had a great fire in 1843, that was kind of their keep calm and carry on version. And to rebuild. So again, I hope that yeah, we are open for questions. I hope that this kind of prompted you to take a look at what's in your hometown and um, check out the new potential designs for our own state seal, motto, and flag. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sage. I'm wondering if you could just say a little bit about how what the process is with the flag and where it stands right now.
Yeah, so just about a month and a half ago, the final three designs that there's a Massachusetts flag and seal commission happening right now, which includes academics, representatives from native tribes, politicians, a little bit of everybody, and they're in the process of um, deciding the last few potential options for the motto, state seal, and the state flag. So, as I mentioned, about a month and a half ago, the final three designs came out for each of those. And there's not a participatory budgeting or voting process on it. Um, but you know, I think that there are some that are a little bit more appropriate than others. There are some that um, our Harvard Crimson, which I don't know is if that again represents the entirety of the state of Massachusetts. So I'm interested to see uh, what they come up with. And one of our, a former Cantabrigian and our close compatriot, Elizabeth Solomon from the Massachusetts tribe, she is on that commission, which is why she can't be part of this presentation today.
Yeah, and I will add to that. I was talking to somebody who's Nipmuc the other day. Nipmuc, yeah. And they told me that there's some contentious conversation across the American Indian tribal nations in Massachusetts about how to preserve Native presence on the flag. And so I didn't hear a lot of detail about how they've presented that tension and how it's sort of like working itself out. But the original image that I showed you, it was the Massachusetts Commonwealth flag by the flag of the Massachusetts tribe. In many ways, the difference is the removal of the colonial arm with the sword. So if you can remove the colonial arm with the sword, for a lot of American Indian peoples in Massachusetts from across tribes, that really resolves a lot of the colonial pressure, if you will, of the flag. So I just wanted to add that it's an ongoing internal debate to those communities, and I myself am trying to figure out how maybe perhaps that hasn't affected the change in selection of those flags at the state level. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, if anybody has any questions or comments, feel free to raise your hand or just shout it out.
I think Greg had written in the chat that settled in, I think referring to the different types of settled, incorporated, plantation, established, and those are European concepts. So why is that important to say when Native people were here for thousands of years? So I have to agree. I don't know. And I think when the commission came up, the state of Massachusetts came up with the requirement for all cities and towns to have their own seals and flags, um, perhaps that was a requirement to have some sort of date where there's a significant first when the history begins, because otherwise you'd have to start it when Native people were here.
And
And
I just want to throw out there that I'm fine with incorporated because that's a legal term, but settled in is very European. I work for a bank and we have a history wall in each branch. And when I first was writing the history, we started with settled in, and I realized that that was inappropriate. And so we started adding the Native American tribes who were on the land before the Europeans, and then we talked about the European function of the town that the branches are in. So I think it's really important to kind of draw people back beyond settled in.
Yeah, and on that note, I will add this very quickly. That's why I find the lack of indigenous Native American American Indian history so unnerving across Boston and Cambridge, because when you go to a place like I was talking about Boston Common, there's this very like contemporary ornamental sort of celebration of the 16, what is it, 16, what is it, 1640? No,
30.
1630, I'm sorry. 1630 like date. Along with the fact there's no discussion of what Boston Common was created for. So like I think in the juxtaposition between the celebration of 1630 and the non-conversation about the history of Boston Common, what are we doing? You know, it's very obvious. Like even to historians, and even if you don't consider yourself an academic historian, but to people who just see themselves as everyday historians, right? That just do it just to be doing it. Like, how do you reconcile those opposing realities?
Mhm. Yeah. Is the work you mentioned that the commission has come down to three final possibilities, or is that not public? I'm sorry, I haven't been following it, but are those are not available for discussion, I take it.
you
The
can write a comment in
I mean, are they
or
visible?
email.
Can they
Yeah,
be seen?
yeah. Let
I'd
me.
be
I
happy
will
to
share my
connect
screen.
them.
Yeah,
That'd be great.
I did put that into the chat, but let me share my screen really quick.
Just to grapple with this.
So these are the seals.
Yeah.
The first one, second one,
Hmm.
and third one, which I thought looked kind of like it was done in fourth grade, Microsoft Paint. Sorry to whoever created it, but and then the flag. So those would be the seal,
Uh-huh.
the flag submissions, Blue Hill, um, and then a Mayflower,
Hmm. Hmm.
and then or six feathers. I mean, they're all kind of underwhelming to me, but I'm not here.
Hmm.
Most associated with education in Massachusetts. Yeah. And then so there's then the motto and still, thinking Latin, um, many voices, one Commonwealth, we all honor life guided by the first light.
Hmm.
And then we rejoice in the public good.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, it seems like the move has been away from history or people. Yeah, that it seems like what people see as the solution is something that's more um,
Bleh.
symbolic, well, symbolic or geographic. Um, I don't know.
And in that move away from humans, native, and that's why I think native peoples across Massachusetts are kind of saying, where are we at in the new flag?
Mhm.
Because it shows you that the people who are having these conversations, and I don't think Elizabeth Solomon is one of those people, by the way, but I think that most of the people having these conversations at the state level just don't get what we're identifying, and us being a bunch of people. The fact that it's the violence, it's the celebration of violence against Native people that is the problem. You can still keep Native presence in the identity and how you talk about and how you create mottos, for example, the state of or the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It's not that hard. It's really not that difficult. Instead of having that conversation, they do want to move all the way over here into left
Mhm.
field, right field, which whatever metaphor you want to use, to some other abstract reality. Yeah, I agree.
I wonder if I can just take us in a slightly different direction, which is, do you want to speak to anything that's happening currently in Cambridge around Native history, what you'd like to see as far as action items on the agenda? What was the reception to the signage in East Cambridge? We're a Cambridge audience, so would love your take on all of that.
Sage, I'd like to hear your opinion about that too.
Yes. So I in the last few, I think Cambridge and all municipalities, there's the community aspect of it, which we were able to get through the participatory budgeting process for change. But in reality, the big changes need to come as budget allocations. And so when I look at next year's budget for the city of Cambridge, where do I see if I see something that's BIPOC, I go up and I look and I say, are there Indigenous people represented on this committee or in this group of business owners or or in leadership positions, which actually leadership positions was a public policy order a couple of years ago that was introduced, and I've invited our dear city manager to give some updates on, where we're at with that. Where is a specific recruitment and support mechanism for Indigenous thought leaders to be working in the city of Cambridge? How has the tremendous amount of money and time that has been put into anti-racist and DEI uh, training work for staff and for residents, how are Native stories being reflected in that? Um, and in investing new money in development and symbolism and histories in the city, are Indigenous voices being sought throughout those planning processes. And that's not quite clear yet. What we do see as part of the Native Spaces project, it's great that the push came from the people in the participatory budgeting process. The hope is that we don't have to continue to stay on the city to make sure that these stories are included. It's clear that they're necessary. It's clear that the history of Cambridge does not start when the first white man's feet came onto this land. And in the same way, speaking to the future of Cambridge, we can establish that that's not the message that Cambridge leaders want to give off. And therefore, they need to really reconcile with if this is a non-white space and it has always been a non-white space or had always been a non-white space and in the future is a non-white dominated space, what are we doing in the meantime to acknowledge that?
I will add to that. I've had as an anthropologist, I do ethnography, and I've had some really interesting ethnographic conversations with leaders who are non-white, who are non-native also living in Cambridge. Some of them church leaders, for example, people in that kind of African American, Caribbean, Black community, for example, and they know nothing, right, about these histories. And their people are like one, maybe two generations in Cambridge, and they're occupying churches that are used to be old white churches where Native peoples could not enter, right? And they're occupying those churches now, and I'm telling them as I meet them, hey, y'all, shouldn't you introduce your new, mostly Black community, right, to these histories and like make it part of your ministry to know where you're at? And they look at me with like, their eyes wide open, but they just don't know how to have that conversation. So what we're dealing with, my point is, what we're dealing with is like a movement from the history of white supremacy, which Cambridge is very much that has a deep history of white supremacy, using the church, to now a multi-ethnic, multiracial, diverse, inclusive, if you will, community of people who still, just like the white folks back in the day, don't know where they're at. They don't have relationships with Native people. They're kind of dumbfounded. So again, that's why I bring up this isn't like a conservative versus liberal, right versus left sort of thing. No, everybody. This is about the American dream. Everybody enjoying the American dream. For them to enjoy it, they must suppress and disappear Native peoples from having real relationships with them. So I just want to make that point very clear.
Mhm. As always, a wonderful conversation with Sage and David. You're getting some nice shout outs in the chat, and I just want to echo that. I super appreciate your sharing your time and expertise with us on this issue. And I hope it's just another continuing conversation that we have together.
I also want to add, if y'all want me to, I'm open. I'm not speaking for Sage at all, but if you want me to do a lecture for your organization sometime in the future, if you have like do a school-wide lecture, something like that, that you would like to kind of use my expertise in that, I'm open to it. I live in Cambridge, so it's like right down the, red line or whatever for me to get there. I'm open to doing education locally, and so I just want to put it out there because at the end of the day, this is about getting people to understand, at least for an hour, the nuances of this conversation broadly.
So appreciated. And Sage put her information in the chat. So they're both very accessible. Thank you so much, friends. On behalf of all of us here at History Cambridge. So thank you. And we'll keep the conversation going. Everyone, you have a great night.
Thank you.
Take
You
care.
too.
Bye.